The thunder of hooves echoed through Redemption Creek as Zane Xavier pulled his chestnut stallion to a halt at the edge of town, his weathered face partially hidden beneath the wide brim of his Stetson. The year was 1878, and the promise of a new beginning stretched before him like the vast Montana territory itself, unnamed, untamed, and uncertain. His gun belt sat heavy on his hips, a necessary companion for a man with shadows dogging his heels. The main street was alive with the typical bustle of a frontier settlement, merchants hawking wares, cowboys stumbling in and out of saloons, and ladies in modest dresses hurrying along wooden sidewalks. No one paid him much mind. Drifters were common enough in these parts, especially those with eyes that had seen too much and shoulders that carried invisible burdens. Zane dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jangling as his boots hit the dusty ground. He led his horse to the water trough outside the general store, watching the animal drink deeply. New in town? The question came from a round-faced man sweeping the boardwalk. Just passing through, Zane answered, his voice low and rough from disuse. The man nodded. Well, if you're looking for a place to stay, Mrs. Miller runs the boarding house down yonder. Fair prices, clean rooms, and the best stew this side of the Mississippi. Zane tipped his hat in thanks, gathering his horse's reins and heading in the direction indicated. He wasn't planning on staying long, just long enough to resupply and rest before continuing his journey to nowhere in particular. The boarding house was a two-story structure with a wide front porch and neatly painted white trim. A hand-painted sign hung from the eaves, Miller's Boarding and Meals. As he tied his horse to the hitching post, the front door swung open. The woman who emerged stopped short at the sight of him. She was slender but strong-looking, with auburn hair peeking from beneath a simple bonnet. Her dress was plain but well-kept, the sleeves rolled to her elbows. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Looking for a room," Zane replied, removing his hat. "Heard Mrs. Miller might have one available." The woman's green eyes assessed him carefully. "I'm Trinity Miller. The room will cost you 50 cents a night, $1 if you want meals included." Zane nodded. $1 sounds fair. As she led him inside, he couldn't help but notice the absence of a wedding ring on her finger, despite the Mrs. title. The interior of the boarding house was modest but clean, with a large common area and a dining table that could seat at least a dozen. "We serve breakfast at 6, dinner at noon, and supper at 6 in the evening," Trinity explained as she showed him to a small but tidy room on the second floor. "Washrooms down the hall. No drinking, no fighting, and no women in the rooms." "Yes, madam," Zane replied, setting his saddlebags on the bed. Trinity lingered in the doorway. "You have a name, stranger?" "Zane. Zane Xavier." "Well, Mr. Xavier, supper's in an hour. Don't be late, I don't serve leftovers." With that, she turned and headed back downstairs, her footsteps fading on the wooden stairs. Zane unpacked only what he needed for the night, leaving most of his belongings in his saddlebags in case a quick departure became necessary. Old habits died hard. After washing up, he made his way to the dining room, where several other boarders were already seated. Trinity moved efficiently around the table, setting down platters of roasted chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread. As the boarders dug in, conversation flowed freely among them all except Zane, who ate quietly, observing. "Mr. Xavier's just passing through," Trinity announced to the table, apparently sensing the curiosity directed his way. "Though most who say that end up staying longer than expected in Redemption Creek." An older man with a silver beard chuckled. "That's the truth. Came for a week myself, 5 years ago." Zane merely nodded, uncomfortable with the attention. As the meal concluded, a commotion from upstairs caught everyone's attention, the sound of small feet running, followed by a child's laughter. Trinity's face flickered with annoyance. "Emma, I told you to stay upstairs until supper was finished," she called out. A little girl, no more than 6 or 7, appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Her copper hair matched Trinity's, though hers hung in 2 messy braids. "But Mama, Sam won't stop pulling my hair." A boy, perhaps 9 years old, appeared behind her. "She took my wooden horse." Trinity sighed. "Both of you, come here and apologize to our guests for the interruption." The children shuffled forward, mumbling apologies with downcast eyes. Zane found himself studying them, the girl's freckled nose, the boy's determined jaw. They bore little resemblance to Trinity beyond the girl's hair color. "These are my children, Emma and Samuel," Trinity explained to Zane, a protective edge to her voice. "Children, this is Mr. Xavier. He'll be staying with us for a short while." The boy looked at Zane with undisguised curiosity. "Are you a real cowboy? With a gun and everything?" "Samuel," Trinity admonished. Zane met the boy's eager gaze. "I've worked cattle, if that's what you're asking." "Do you shoot bad guys?" Samuel persisted. "Only when necessary," Zane replied carefully. Trinity ushered the children back upstairs. "That's enough questions for tonight. Say goodnight to everyone." After they'd gone, an awkward silence fell over the table. One by one, the boarders excused themselves until only Zane and Trinity remained. "I apologize for my son's forwardness," she said as she cleared the dishes. "He's fascinated by cowboys and outlaws. His father filled his head with such nonsense before she stopped herself, stacking plates with more force than necessary. "No harm done," Zane assured her, rising to help clear the table. Trinity seemed surprised by the gesture, but didn't refuse his assistance. As they worked side by side in the small kitchen, Zane found himself wondering about the absence of a Mr. Miller. "How long have you run this place?" he asked, hoping it was a safe topic. 3 years on my own," she replied, scrubbing a pot. 5 total. My husband built it, but he's been gone 3 years now." The way she said gone told Zane all he needed to know. Death or desertion either way, she was alone with 2 young children in a frontier town. "It's a fine establishment," he offered. A small smile touched her lips. "It keeps a roof over our heads. That's all I can ask for." The next morning, Zane woke before dawn, a habit ingrained from years on the trail. To his surprise, he found Trinity already in the kitchen, kneading dough for the day's bread. "You're up early," she remarked without looking up. "Could say the same for you," he replied, pouring himself a cup of coffee from the pot on the stove. "Running a boarding house doesn't allow for lazy mornings," she said, shaping the dough with practiced hands. "What's your excuse?" Zane took a sip of the strong, black coffee. "Force of habit. On the trail, you learn to rise with the sun or before it." "And where is the trail taking you now, Mr. Xavier?" He stared into his cup. "Nowhere in particular." Trinity studied him for a moment. "That's a lonely destination." Before he could respond, a crash from outside drew their attention. Trinity hurried to the window, her flour-covered hands leaving prints on her apron. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. "It's Harlan Reed and his men. They're harassing poor Mr. Chin again." Zane moved to look over her shoulder. In the gray light of dawn, he could see several men on horseback surrounding a smaller figure who appeared to be trying to enter a small building with a sign identifying it as a laundry. "Happens at least once a month," Trinity explained, her voice tight with anger. "Reed owns half the businesses in town, wants to own them all. Mr. Chin refuses to sell, so Reed's boys make trouble." Zane watched as one of the mounted men knocked over a bucket of water the Chinese man had been carrying. "And the sheriff?" Trinity scoffed. "Sheriff Davis? He's Reed's cousin by marriage." Turns a blind eye. Without thinking too much about it, Zane set down his coffee cup and reached for his hat. "Excuse me, Mrs. Miller. What are you?" she began, but he was already heading for the door. Outside, the morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn. Zane walked casually toward the scene, his right hand relaxed but ready near his holstered Colt. As he approached, the men on horseback took notice. "This ain't your concern, stranger," called out a burly man with a thick mustache. "Harlan Reed," Zane presumed. Zane ignored him, instead addressing the Chinese man. "Morning. Having some trouble?" Mr. Chin looked up, surprise evident on his face. "They break my water buckets. Every week, new buckets." "That true?" Zane asked, finally looking at Reed. Reed spat on the ground. "Chinaman's lying. Bucket was already broken. We're just having a friendly talk about his property, which should have been mine months ago." Zane nodded thoughtfully. "Funny kind of friendly. Where I come from, friends don't usually surround a man 4 to 1 at daybreak." "And where exactly do you come from?" Reed demanded, his hand drifting toward his own sidearm. "All over," Zane replied evenly. "Picked up a few lessons along the way. Like how a man who needs 3 others to back his play usually isn't worth listening to." Reed's face reddened. "You calling me a coward?" "Not calling you anything," Zane said. Just suggesting you and your friends might have business elsewhere this morning. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then Reed glanced at Zane's gun belt and the way he carried himself. Something in the cowboy's calm demeanor must have given him pause. "Come on, boys," Reed finally said. "We'll finish our conversation with Mr. Chun another time." As he turned his horse, he fixed Zane with a hard stare. "You just made an enemy, stranger." "Wouldn't be the first," Zane replied. As the riders departed, Mr. Chun bowed slightly to Zane. "Thank you. Very brave. Or very foolish," came Trinity's voice from behind them. She stood on the boardwalk, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "Reed doesn't forget slights." "I'll be gone before he has time to remember," Zane assured her. But as they walked back to the boarding house together, Trinity glanced sideways at him. "For a man just passing through, you've made quite an impression." The incident with Reed altered Zane's plans. He'd intended to leave Redemption Creek after a day or two, but something kept him there, a sense of unfinished business, perhaps. Or maybe it was the way Samuel's eyes lit up when Zane agreed to show him how to properly groom a horse, or how Emma had shyly offered him a wildflower she'd picked on her way home from school. Or perhaps it was Trinity herself, with her quiet strength and the rare smile that transformed her face when something genuinely amused her. A week passed, then too. Zane found odd jobs around town, helping the blacksmith with particularly difficult horses, assisting the livery stable owner when a shipment of supplies arrived, even repairing Trinity's leaky roof. He paid for his room fairly, but Trinity had begun to refuse payment for extra portions at meals. "You've more than earned it," she insisted one evening after he'd split a winter's worth of firewood for the boarding house. "Besides, you eat like a bird compared to some of my boarders." They were sitting on the front porch after supper, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold. The children were inside, Samuel reading to Emma from a battered copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. "I've been thinking," Trinity said suddenly, "that Samuel could use a man's influence. He's asking questions I don't know how to answer properly." Zane waited, sensing there was more to this conversation. "I don't mean anything improper," she clarified quickly. "But if you're planning to stay a while longer, perhaps you could. Take him fishing sometime. Teach him things his father should have taught him." The request hung between them in the evening air. It implied a level of trust that Zane wasn't sure he deserved. "I'm not exactly father material," he said finally. Trinity's gaze remained on the mountains. "Few men are, until they have to be." Before Zane could respond, the pounding of hooves announced riders coming down the main street. Reed and his men, their faces half hidden by bandanas, were heading straight for the Chinese laundry. Zane was on his feet immediately. "Get inside," he told Trinity. "Lock the door." "Zane," she called after him as he strode toward the street, but he was already gone. The next few minutes were chaos. Reed's men were smashing windows and throwing torches into the laundry. Mr. Chun ran out, only to be knocked to the ground by one of Reed's thugs. Zane arrived just as the building began to catch fire. What happened next wasn't something Zane planned. It was instinct, the kind born from years of fighting on the wrong side of too many battles. He drew his revolver and fired a warning shot into the air, then leveled it at Reed. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. Reed pulled down his bandana, his face ugly with hatred. "Should have minded your own business, cowboy." "Put out that fire," Zane ordered. "Now." Reed laughed. "Or what? You'll shoot us all. There are 4 of us, one of you." "3 of you now," Zane corrected, nodding toward one of Reed's men who had wisely slipped away during the confrontation. "And I only need 1 bullet for you, Reed." Something in his tone must have convinced Reed of his seriousness. "Fine. Put it out, boys. We've made our point." As his men scrambled to extinguish the flames, Reed addressed Zane again. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." Zane kept his gun trained on Reed until the fire was out and they had ridden away. Only then did he help Mr. Chun to his feet and assess the damage. The laundry was scorched, but not destroyed. A crowd had gathered by then, including Sheriff Davis, who looked more annoyed than concerned. "You're causing trouble in my town, Xavier," he said, approaching Zane. "Seemed like trouble was already here," Zane replied. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "I'll be watching you. One wrong move, and you'll find yourself in my jail." As the crowd dispersed, Zane felt a hand on his arm. Trinity stood beside him, her face pale in the fading light. You could have been killed, she said quietly. Wasn't my first encounter with men like Reed. That's what worries me, she admitted. Who are you really, Zane Xavier? What kind of man rides into town with nothing but shadows behind him and faces down 4 armed men without blinking? Zane looked away. The kind you shouldn't trust around your children. Trinity's grip on his arm tightened. Yet I do trust you. God help me, I do. That night, unable to sleep, Zane sat in the darkened common room of the boarding house. His past weighed heavily on him, the years riding with Calhoun's gang, the robberies, the shootouts. He'd left that life behind 2 years ago, but it had a way of finding him, no matter how far he rode. Trinity found him there, a solitary figure illuminated only by moonlight through the window. She sat beside him without speaking, her presence both a comfort and a complication. I should leave, he said eventually. Reed won't stop, and I've brought his attention to your door. Is that the only reason? She asked softly. Zane hesitated. No. Tell me, she urged. Whatever it is, tell me. So he did. About his years as an outlaw, about the price that might still be on his head in certain territories, about his decision to walk away from that life after watching Calhoun gun down a young bank teller for no reason other than spite. I've been trying to outrun who I was, he concluded. But men like me don't get fresh starts, Trinity. We don't get happy endings. Trinity was quiet for a long moment. My husband wasn't killed in an accident like everyone in town believes, she finally said. He abandoned us, took what little money we had, and ran off with a woman from the saloon. I tell people he's dead because it's easier than admitting I married a man who could leave his own children. The confession hung in the air between them, a shared vulnerability. We all have pasts we're not proud of, Trinity continued. The question is whether we let them determine our futures. Before Zane could respond, a small voice came from the stairwell. Mama? I had a bad dream. Emma stood there in her nightgown, clutching a well-worn cloth doll. Trinity immediately went to her, lifting the child into her arms. It's all right, sweetheart. Do you want to tell me about it? Emma shook her head, then noticed Zane. Mr. Xavier, do you ever have bad dreams? The innocence of the question struck him. Yes, Emma. I do. What do you do to make them go away? Zane thought for a moment. I remind myself that dreams can't hurt me, and that when I wake up, I'm safe. Emma seemed to consider this seriously. Can you check under my bed for monsters? Mama does, but Samuel says a real cowboy would be better at finding them. Trinity gave Zane an apologetic look, but he was already getting to his feet. I'd be honored to check for monsters, he said gravely. As he followed Trinity and Emma upstairs, something shifted inside him, a realization that perhaps the future wasn't set in stone after all. The next day, Reed's revenge came not as a direct confrontation, but as something more insidious. Rumors began to spread through town, rumors about Zane's past, about his true identity. By noon, Sheriff Davis was at the boarding house door with a wanted poster in hand. Zane Xavier, he announced in the common room, where several boarders were gathered for the midday meal. Wanted in Colorado territory for robbery and accessory to murder. There's a $500 reward for your capture. Trinity, who had been serving soup, went utterly still. The other boarders looked between Zane and the sheriff with varying degrees of shock and fear. That poster's 2 years old, Zane said calmly, not denying its authenticity. And I was never charged with murder. Nevertheless, the sheriff replied, I'm placing you under arrest until I can verify whether the warrant is still active. Trinity stepped forward. This is ridiculous. He's been nothing but a help to this town. Mrs. Miller, this man is a wanted criminal, Davis insisted. Now stand aside. For a tense moment, it seemed Trinity might refuse. But Zane gently touched her arm. It's all right. I'll go with the sheriff. Better to sort this out properly. As Davis led him away, Zane caught a glimpse of Samuel and Emma watching from the top of the stairs, their faces masks of confusion and distress. The Redemption Creek jail was a small building with 2 cells. Zane was locked in one, while the other remained empty. Sheriff Davis made a show of sending a telegram to Colorado to verify the warrant, but Zane suspected the man was in no hurry to receive a reply. He spent that night on a hard cot, staring at the ceiling and wondering if this was the universe's way of reminding him that redemption had a price. The next morning, he had a visitor. Trinity arrived with a basket containing a proper breakfast and clean clothes. How did you get Davis to allow this? Zane asked as she passed the items through the bars. I reminded him that even prisoners are entitled to humane treatment, she replied. Then, lowering her voice, she added, and I may have mentioned that my late father was a circuit judge who would be appalled at the conditions in this jail. Despite everything, Zane found himself smiling. You're something else, Trinity Miller. Her expression turned serious. I spoke with Mr. Chun and several other business owners who've suffered under Reed's tyranny. They're willing to testify that Reed is behind all of this, that he's using your past to get rid of you because you stood up to him. It won't matter, Zane said. My past is real. I did ride with Calhoun. I did participate in those robberies. But you've changed, Trinity insisted. That counts for something. Zane gripped the bars between them. In a court of law? No, it doesn't. Trinity's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The children keep asking when you're coming home. I don't know what to tell them. The word home struck Zane like a physical blow. In all his years of wandering, he'd never thought of any place as home. Until now. Tell them the truth, he said softly. That sometimes good people make bad choices and have to face the consequences. Trinity reached through the bars to touch his face. And sometimes they get second chances. Before she left, she pressed something into his hand, a small, crude wooden carving of a horse. Samuel made this for you. He said every cowboy needs a good horse, even if it's just a small one to keep in your pocket. Zane closed his fingers around the carving, a lump forming in his throat. Thank you. That afternoon, unexpected salvation arrived in the form of a distinguished gentleman in an expensive suit. He introduced himself to Sheriff Davis as Judge Howard Wilson, recently arrived from Denver on circuit court business. I understand you're holding a prisoner connected to the Calhoun gang, the judge said, examining the wanted poster. Yes, Your Honor, Davis replied, suddenly much more formal than Zane had ever seen him. Waiting on confirmation from Colorado authorities. Judge Wilson adjusted his spectacles. No need. I'm quite familiar with the case. Calhoun and most of his gang were captured or killed 2 years ago. Xavier here was the only one who wasn't accounted for. The sheriff looked disappointed. So the warrant is still active? Actually, no. The judge said, surprising both men. Xavier was offered amnesty in exchange for testimony against Calhoun. The charges were dropped when Calhoun was convicted. This poster should have been recalled. Zane stared at the judge in disbelief. He'd never testified against Calhoun, never been offered amnesty. Are you certain, Your Honor? Davis pressed. Absolutely. I presided over Calhoun's trial myself. The judge fixed Davis with a stern look. This man should be released immediately. Within the hour, Zane was free, walking down the main street with Judge Wilson beside him. Only when they were well away from the jail did Zane speak. Why did you lie for me? I never testified against Calhoun. Wilson smiled slightly. Let's just say I have a fondness for redemption stories. A certain boarding house proprietress made a very compelling case for yours this morning. Trinity spoke to you. She did more than speak. She convinced half the town to vouch for your character. Quite a remarkable woman. The judge paused. Calhoun is indeed dead, by the way. Shot trying to escape custody last year. Most of his gang are either dead or serving long sentences. The wanted poster was legitimate, but outdated. Zane absorbed this information. So I'm truly free? From that particular past, yes. Judge Wilson extended his hand. What you do with that freedom is up to you, Mr. Xavier. As Zane watched the judge walk away, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not completely gone, but lighter than it had been in years. He turned toward the boarding house, where his future waited. News traveled fast in a small town. By the time Zane reached the boarding house, Trinity was already on the porch waiting for him, Samuel and Emma flanking her like eager sentinels. Mr. Xavier, Samuel shouted, racing down the steps. Did you really fight outlaws? Were you in a real jail? Did they give you bread and water? Emma simply wrapped her arms around Zane's legs, holding tight as if afraid he might disappear again. Trinity hung back, her expression a mixture of relief and uncertainty. When their eyes met over the children's heads, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Children, let Mr. Xavier breathe, she finally said. He's had quite an ordeal. That evening, after the children were in bed, Zane and Trinity sat together on the porch swing, the same as they had many evenings before. But something had changed. Barriers had fallen. truths had been revealed. Judge Wilson told me what you did, Zane said, rallying the town on my behalf. Trinity shrugged. People here have good hearts. They just needed to be reminded of that. And Reed. The judge paid him a visit too. Mentioned something about federal investigations into business practices that suppress competition. Reed's been unusually quiet since then. Zane chuckled. I've got a feeling that Judge is more than he appears to be. Aren't we all? Trinity replied, her hand finding his in the darkness between them. Zane turned to face her. I should still leave, you know. My past may have caught up with me once. It could happen again. Or you could stay, Trinity said softly. Build a new past. A better one. With you? The question was barely audible. Trinity's answer came not in words, but in the gentle press of her lips against his, tentative at first, then with growing certainty. When they finally parted, Zane rested his forehead against hers. I don't know how to be anything but a drifter, he admitted. Then I'll teach you, she promised. The same way you've been teaching Samuel about horses and Emma about facing her nightmares. One day at a time. The seasons changed in Redemption Creek. Winter blanketed the town in snow, then yielded to a vibrant spring. By summer, few remembered that Zane Xavier had once been a mysterious stranger with a shadowy past. He was now a respected member of the community, partner in the livery stable, occasional deputy when Sheriff Davis, who had become considerably more conscientious after Judge Wilson's visit, needed assistance, and a familiar figure at the Miller boarding house. It was on a warm August evening, exactly 1 year after he'd first ridden into town, that Zane asked Trinity to marry him. They stood in the small garden behind the boarding house, surrounded by the wildflowers Emma had insisted on planting. Are you certain? Trinity asked, her eyes searching his. This life, me, the children, this town, it's so different from what you knew before. Zane took her hands in his. That's precisely why I want it. Why I want you. He glanced toward the house, where Samuel and Emma were undoubtedly watching from the window despite being told to stay inside. All of you. Their wedding was a simple affair, held in the town's small church with Judge Wilson returning to perform the ceremony. Mr. Chun provided silk ribbons for decorations, and the entire town turned out to celebrate. As Trinity and Zane exchanged vows, Samuel stood proudly as best man, while Emma scattered flower petals with exuberant joy. The family they had created not by blood but by choice was cemented that day in the eyes of God and the community. Later, at the reception held at the boarding house, soon to be renamed the Xavier Family Inn, Zane found a moment alone with Trinity. When I rode into Redemption Creek, I was running from ghosts, he told her, holding her close as music played and their guests celebrated around them. I never imagined I'd find a reason to stop running. Trinity touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines that had softened over the past year. And I never thought I'd trust my heart to another man. Yet here we are. Here we are, Zane echoed, looking around at the home and family they had built together. The storm that had raged within him for so long, the restlessness, the guilt, the fear had finally been calmed by the steady presence of this remarkable woman and the love of 2 children who had accepted him without reservation. As the sun set on their wedding day, casting golden light across the porch where they had first begun to fall in love, Zane Xavier knew with absolute certainty that he had found what so many spend a lifetime searching for, not just redemption, but belonging. The cowboy who had ridden into town alone had found so much more than he'd ever dared to hope for: a family, a future, and the woman who had tamed the storm in his soul.